and that's a difficult thing for me. I do write a lot about forgiveness and regret and things I've done wrong. I've thrown myself under the bus in many, many poems. I have no problem with that. I may love myself, but by golly, I'm my own worst enemy sometimes.
Yeah. Welcome to Book Therapy. I'm your host, Kim Patton. There's no way to count how many books are floating around in this world. Some are decent, some are truly terrible, and some are great. Today we're going to take a deep dive into one great book. Together we will discover gems of truth and encouragement to help you face your current season of life. I'm ready, you're ready, let's get this party started. Hello friends, thank you so much for joining us here today. We have a guest who has published several books, and stay tuned until the end because you will get to find out about a special celebrity who stumbled upon our guest's Instagram page and left him a comment. So, hope you enjoy. Let's dive into the book. I have a special guest for you today. His name is Jim Steele, and we will be talking about his newest poetry collection titled Nightstand Notes and Other Beginnings. This is his 7th book, and I am proud to say I have read all 7. They are fantastic, and this book is no exception. Jim lives in Central Florida and is retired. He loves to travel. He loves spending time with his wife, Vicki, and he is the poet laureate for Lake County. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
For those who don't know, can you explain exactly what poet laureate means and what you enjoy most about that honor?
Well, poet laureate is kind of an honorary position. It doesn't pay or anything like that. And my main responsibility is to expand the interest of poetry within the county that I'm in. Since I'm poet laureate of Lake County, my responsibility lies to the whole county. I do workshops, reading workshops, writing poetry workshops, workshops on self-publishing, and I just this past week I did 2 workshops on posting your poetry on Instagram. So it's just making the footprint of poetry larger. That's my responsibility.
That's really cool. And you've only been doing it for a couple months, right?
Well, about 6 months. I'm coming up with my own ideas. I'm only the 2nd poet laureate of Lake County, and I rely on my predecessor a lot. I think you may know her, Laura Sabat Ross. I'm just coming up with my own ideas because I'm kind of on my own out here.
Yeah, you're the only one. There's only one poet laureate.
Yeah.
So I've chosen 3 aspects of your writing that we're going to talk about. You know how much I love your writing, obviously. And actually, many of my readers know because I've been talking about it for the past, couple of years. Out of your 7 books, I have a lot of favorite poems. Reading your books is an experience for me. It's more enjoyable for me to read the paperback than to read them online, which I know a lot of your readers read your poetry on your Instagram. So this is what I've noticed in this book in particular. And we're going to start with the fact that you highlight the uniqueness of each individual. On page 76, you have a poem that says, "Find a way to love yourself. It's not about ego. You'll wish it was that easy. It's about forgiveness." Forgiving yourself is something that I think you talk a lot about in your poems. You talk a lot about regret in all 7 of your books. You have at least 1 or 2 poems in there about regret, which is a really humble way to present poetry. You're talking about the things that cause you the most pain.
I think it's very important that everyone cares for themselves first. You have to be your own best friend. For me, self-forgiveness, even from the standpoint of my faith, has always been very difficult for me, especially if the people that I've wronged have not forgiven me yet. So eventually, I just have to kind of wipe the slate clean for myself, and that's a difficult thing for me. I do write a lot about forgiveness and regret and things I've done wrong. I've thrown myself under the bus in many, many poems. I have no problem with that. I may love myself, but by golly, I'm my own worst enemy sometimes.
Yeah.
But I have reached the point where I have forgiven myself. So maybe in the next book, there might be some poems that will seem like I've turned a corner.
Oh, good. Well, that is a theme I notice in a lot of your poems is turning a corner.
Yeah.
You face the past, you face your present, and you always have, it's not just at the end of the poem everything is great and you tie it up in a nice little bow. And I've been thinking about that lately in our writing. Are we tying it up in a nice little bow at the end? And I think I tend to do that. And that's something I can probably work on. But I don't know that you always do that. You kind of leave us in the you leave us in the murky middle.
I mean, I'm probably going to pass away someday with a lot of loose ends still untied. But sometimes you just get to the point where it's like, I've done all I can do. If the people that I've wronged are still holding it against me, there's nothing more I can do. They know where I stand. They know that I'm sorry, that I've apologized and so forth for whatever it is. It could be something major, something minor. I've held myself accountable, and I think that's the main thing. So I finish it off and I move on, and
Mm-hmm.
I may write a lot of poems after that that might deal with I feel so much better now and all that kind of stuff. But then I'll come right back to it and say, but if this one person could just you know
Yeah. Another one that I love is on page 82. I like how you say, if I could invent a new word for love, a word just for you, it would never be spoken in the ear of another. You are you, there is no other. It is overused. And you have so many poems about love. And that's what I liked the best about your Sun and Shadow book. I always think it's so funny because that book is split in half, Sun and Shadow, and the first half is mostly about love. And I enjoyed reading the shadow poems, but I loved all the sun poems because it was just totally up my alley. Just like this is an optimistic book. And then I read the shadow part and I was like, oh, okay. Well, I like the first half better, but
yeah.
so you are you, there is no other. That expresses to me the specialness of everybody. And it's amazing how unique everybody is. And it's amazing how two people, when they love each other, they see things that nobody else sees and they see the most unique parts of each other. And I think that's really powerful. Okay, circling back to forgiving yourself on page 150, it reads, what is a long life but 30,000 second chances?
Yeah. I write a lot of little poems like this that start out with a question like this: what is a long life? What is love but a kick in the butt that you enjoy or something like that.
How, is that part of your process? Do you hear questions and you're curious, or you hear other people say a premise and you challenge it?
No, I think I like to look at things from the absolute opposite view. Even when I was a kid and I'd be riding my bike down a country road, I would stop and I would walk up a hill of a meadow just so I could turn around and see what it looked like from the other side. And that's exactly how I approach poetry. Like love is a positive thing, but I also want to look at the negative aspects about love. How it can break your heart and also heal you and then break you again and things like that. I just wrote a poem and somewhere in it said, what is self-esteem but a suicide that doesn't kill? I like stuff like that.
Hmm.
I like to ask the question and then just answer it according to that different viewpoint.
It's like you're flipping back and
Yes,
forth. You're seeing both sides and you're also challenging. Maybe I see in a lot of your poems that you challenge a common view.
yes. I think I wrote a poem one time called "All That Matters," and I said the stars are not the ceiling; they're the floor because that's how I see it. Death is not a wall, but a passageway.
Mm-hmm.
So I just try to just think one step beyond.
And in analogies and metaphors, which is kind of the beauty of poetry. We like things that are a little bit different, a little bit offbeat. Secondly, I noticed that you appreciate two things: genuine relationships and humble faith. And you kind of touched on your faith a little bit. I'll read a poem that touches on both of these things because when I read this poem, I thought of my husband And you said that when you read this poem or when other people read this, sometimes they think of God. And it reminds me, like in high school, when you're singing worship songs, but it doesn't actually say, God or Jesus or anything. And so people could take it to mean that they could sing it to their boyfriend or girlfriend. And it was kind of a joke that some worship songs are like, is it about a relationship or about your faith? So this poem was my favorite in this book. On page 30, you say, "Cast your shadow over me. It's the safest place I know." That to me felt very personal. I've been with my husband for 12 years, and I don't often feel unsafe in this world. But when I read that poem, he's the first person I thought of because he's the first person I run to most of the time. He's my best friend. And I'm interested in what other people have said about this poem in regards to their faith.
Well, you're right. A lot of people see this straight from the faith point of view, and other people see it as like their parents or something like that. One girl DM'd me one time, and she said that the first person she thought of was her mom, which makes complete sense to me. I write a lot of poems about shadows touching you. Most of the time, it's a negative thing, though. This is probably the only positive poem I've ever written about a shadow touching you, and or just the aspect of the effect that the shadow has. But this was written 100% from the standpoint of faith.
What do you feel as a poet when people can come and talk to you about your poems and they perceive them differently? I mean, you know that when you make art, you release it into the world and people take ownership of it, just like I did when I read this poem. How does that make you feel?
Well, for a long time, it used to make me feel like I did not convey my message correctly. Um, but Vicky, she edits everything and she says, "What are you trying to say here?" And I tell her, and she says, "I'm not seeing that at all." And sometimes I just overrule her with difficulty. Um, but it does make me think like, sometimes I think, how could you not see, the way I see it? And other times I'm like, well, I can see how you would see that. It's very difficult to have that kind of objectivity when you're writing because you see it the way you feel it and you don't imagine it being seen any other way.
Right.
It's
It's
yes, it
probably
is.
surprising when people come up to you and you say, "Wow, that never crossed my mind." But
Yeah. It used to deflate me a little, but now I don't care. I just keep writing.
okay, I lied. I mean, the other one was my favorite, but this is probably my second favorite.
Okay.
And also I thought of Kevin as well. This is on page 89. "You've witnessed my bright skies and my dark ones, endured both and stayed. That for me is love." So this poem is so simple. I mean, your poems, and I don't mean this to insult you, but they are so simple. You don't have complex words. You do have complex ideas. Man, how many times have I told you that this is like, it's leaving me speechless a little bit, which is not great when you run a podcast, people. You're supposed to know what to say. But I like this. All it is saying you've seen the worst parts of me and you've seen the best parts of me and you're still here. And I can tell you 100% Kevin has seen the worst parts of me. Like yesterday, okay? So we've been through a lot together and I just really like how I mean, this is genuine relationships. Like you love writing about true, faithful, consistent relationships, and I think everybody can relate to that.
Well, and I agree with this. The poem has nothing to do with anything, with any trappings of life or anything monetary. It doesn't have anything to do with money or possessions. It's strictly about you stayed for me and nothing else. A lot of one of the biggest questions in poetry is write a poem about what love is. Well, that's like 10 million different poems. Um, I think
You've done that. You have written about love in 10 million different ways.
just quickly, I wrote a poem one time that says, "For me, this is love." It's when all desires have been fulfilled, my mind rests only on you. This
Mm-hmm.
for me is love.
Mm-hmm.
I love you when I need you, and I love you when those needs are met. Period.
Hmm. I do like the book you wrote, Simple Truths, right? Is your book on faith?
Yes, it's yes, from the standpoint of faith, yes.
That was really enjoyable for me. And these two poems kind of reflect the same ideas. On page 105, I still see the wonder of the world because I take the time to look for it. That was a little
Yeah.
convicting. Thanks, Jim.
I wrote that when I saw a flower growing out of the concrete in a sidewalk. I
Mm.
just thought it was a little miracle. And I'm like, I'm glad I saw this. I'm glad I didn't step on it.
And you're a tall guy. That's no easy feat to
Yeah.
not step
It
on
was
a
a long,
flower.
it was a long look down there.
And then on page 111, I'm living this life because it's what I must do to go home. I just want to go home.
Yes. 100% faith based right there.
That is so powerful. And my husband is in hospice and he can't like share details with me because of HIPAA, but I know that he's seen forms of death weekly. And it doesn't really affect me much because we can't really talk about the details, but the fact that every day he's being exposed to people that are that close to death. And when I read this poem, I thought that is the perspective. I mean, even the fact that you use the word home, we think of home as, comfort and safety and these four walls that we're in every day. And for me, I'm in them literally all day sometimes. But you're talking about a home that is home for your soul.
Yes. My last home.
Lastly, and I really wanted to get to this because in your other books, I didn't see you talk about poetry and poets like you did in this book. I felt that you personified poetry in many of these pages. Tell me why you wanted to talk about that a little bit more in this book.
Every now and then I go on Instagram live and I'm interviewed or people ask me about my poetry. And one of the main questions is your process. What is your process? I see poetry as like a diary. It's just something you just sit down and do. It's like yoga or an exercise or something like that. I never beat myself up if I don't write anything for a month, and I may sit down and write 4 poems in one day. Poetry to me is therapeutic. And I only share about 10% of what I write. I would still write almost every day just because it's like exercising for me, but not the physical part.
Yeah, easier.
Yeah. Much easier. I really don't work up a sweat, and I just feel better afterwards. People say, "What inspires you?" Well, a lot of people would say songs or movies or something that would inspire you to write poetry. What inspires me most is reading other poetry. That really nails it for me. If
Mm-hmm.
I feel like writing, but my mind's empty, I just read some poetry and I'm ready to go.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good stuff out there. And I'm glad you have that community online because it seems like that has been a big part of inspiring you and just giving you feedback as well as meeting really wonderful people.
Yes, I don't go live very often. I've probably been live on Instagram once in the last 10 months. I'm constantly asked, which is very flattering and humbling and everything. But I'm not a live guy. I'd be instead of the actor, I'd be the cameraman or something.
Cameraman Jim.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just read on page 43, just a section of this poem. Your unnumbered pages are filled with a language nobody knows. You are living poetry and your verses glimmer in the sunlight. Like, do people inspire you to write poems? Like, do you people watch? I know that's an awkward question, but
Yes, a lot of my longer poems are always about I saw this girl sitting in Panera Bread, or I saw this girl sitting in the red vinyl booth, or I saw this girl on the train. I've written a lot of poems about that, and I mean I'm not creepy about it, but I watch and I just try to imagine what's going through their head. I mean, sometimes they're just staring blankly out the window or crying on the phone, and I mean there's just a mountain of poetry in that. Someone I tell people, I said, if you want to be a poet, it all starts with realizing that poetry is in everything you see and everyone you talk to. It's just everywhere, and that's how I look at it. I mean, who knows? Maybe this podcast will become a poem. I don't know. But it's just, I mean, there's just so much material out there. You can't get it all.
Someone said once about writing that it's just simply observing. He just wrote this little paragraph about watching a bird in a parking lot. And I don't even remember what was significant about it, but he wrote about it in such detail. And then his main point at the end was simply to encourage other writers. I'm just telling what happened. I'm just showing what happened. I'm describing what I saw, what was going on. Writing doesn't have to be super complicated. Observation is the biggest thing. And it sounds like with poetry, if you're looking for it or if you're aware of it and can see the beauty, then there's a poem in there. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up with this final poem on page 147. Maybe life isn't measured by time. Maybe it's measured by distance, not by how long we live, but by how far we reach.
I believe that 100%.
I just wanted to thank you for helping people reach further, reach higher. It's a small thing, maybe sometimes that you feel that you're doing because it's come so natural to you. But I really think that your poetry has helped me immensely just to broaden my mind and my heart and to be more open to faith, to be more open to taking that next step in faith, whether it's just getting through the day or something to read, before I go to sleep so that I have a pleasant experience and I'm not worrying. Your poetry has in times past replaced worry or negative thoughts. And I appreciate that. And I think it's inspiring to read something like that says life is about what you're reaching for and it's not necessarily about what you're attaining, which is a great temptation for many people, but about the hope of reaching out. So I wanted to thank you for inspiring so many people, for writing these books that, from short poems to long poems. I think the content is just something that's always delightful to read.
Well, thank you, Kim. And it's kind thoughts like that that make me want to keep writing. It's gratifying to know that I'm not the only one that is touched by my poetry. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. So tell our listeners where they can find you, what projects you're up to, what you do on Instagram so they can find you there, etc.
What I'm up to, I am in the process of writing a children's book about a little blue whale called Zuzu. I love whales. Okay. And that, with a little bit of luck, I might have the content done by the end of this year. But the illustrations are going to be done by a young lady in England, so we're going to have to collaborate on that. My next two books are finished. I finished my ninth book in the computer yesterday.
Woohoo.
So my next book of poetry is going to come out probably sometime around July, maybe, and the next one after that, maybe sometime in the middle of next year. They're both going to be normal length poetry, but I'm also working on something where I'm going to have 365 little bitty poems, just like in this book, and they're all going to be pretty positive poems.
Okay. So, great. So
yes.
tell me about your Instagram life.
Instagram. Well, I've been on Instagram a couple years. I don't know how many. I think I might have maybe 7,000 followers, 7,100, something like that. I follow a lot of people. It's a great resource for poets. It's a huge community, and they're very well connected. And there's a lot of sites that just do poetry. There's a lot of places you can go for positive input and critical advice and things like that. A lot of self-publishing advice. You can practice your live skills as much as you want. You can go on 6 times a day and just read live poetry. People will invite you on. You'll read a poem, then you'll split. I don't do that. The best-selling poet in the last 100 years is Rupi Kaur, and she was an Instagram poet.
Yeah.
So that's where she got her start.
Cool. And you're Jim's pen, correct?
Jims.pen, JIMS.pen. And I also have JimSteelePoetry.com.
I have to say, the day you told me that Denzel Washington reached out to you and said he read your poems just blew my mind for about a month.
Well, I don't know how many he read. He commented on one or two. He said he went down the rabbit hole on my poetry. I don't really even know what that means, but that's what he said.
Well,
So,
congratulations on that alone. I mean, that's the coolest thing.
well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right, Jim. Well, it's been great having you, and thank you for your poetry. Thank you for your books, and best of luck with all of your projects coming up.
Thank you very much, Kim. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Book Therapy Podcast. Today we talked with Jim Steele about his poetry book, Nightstand Notes and Other Beginnings. If you liked learning about Jim and would like to check out his poetry, you can go to his website, jimsteelepoetry.com, or his Instagram, jims.pen. Stay tuned for more special guests to come. I can't wait to share with you guys all of these authors that I'm going to be interviewing, as well as going over new books that you know and love. So see you next time. We like things that are a little bit different, a little bit offbeat. Okay, secondly, what?
I couldn't live without him.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up.
Okay.
It just gave me my 10-minute warning, so we are in good shape.